June 8th, 2024, in this episode of Stand Tall, special episode. We're going to go through some of the markings I made on this book I just finished, Predictably Irrational. This book was recommended to me by one of my clients. Nonfiction books are a little harder for me to get through. This one was so compelling, I was able to put down Helldivers 2 at the end of the night and want to go actually read this book almost a full chapter at a time. So, highly recommend this book to anyone looking to learn a little bit more about human nature and the things that make us not tick correctly. So, let me start with the first tab about the bread maker. I thought was very interesting, offering a much larger, much less attractive bread maker only to sell the original one, because who needs a bread maker? But now, once you have a choice of the small, cozy one that fits on your countertop versus the big one that makes a lot of bread that they know that they'll hardly sell, gives you this illusion of choice. And it actually did help this bread bakery, Williams Sonoma, this machine, and actually helped him sell more. So I thought that was an interesting little anecdote. Okay, or study. All right, let's go over to this one about Hong. In his case, he started by selling his Porsche Boxster and buying a Toyota Prius in its place, telling the New York Times, "I don't want to live the life of a Boxster, because when you get a Boxster, you wish you had a 911. And you know what people who have a 911s wish they had? They wish they had a Ferrari." That's a lesson we can all learn. The more we have, the more we want. And the only cure is to break the cycle of relativity. So the cycle, I love that he says cycle, because I'm big on patterns, synchronicities, repetitions, iterations over and over and over again. And you have to break that keeping up with the Joneses pattern. All right. Looks like Tom had discovered a great law of human action, namely that in order to make a man covet a thing, it is only necessary to make it difficult to attain. As expected, more money caused our participants to be more motivated and work harder by about 50%. This was a experiment that they had them do, draw circles, and then when money was involved, they did, I think, about 50% more work. Basically, talking about the difference and differentiating between monetary norms, economic norms, right, as social norms. And I think that um, that is great throughout this book. Okay, so once a social norms and market norms is trumped by a market norm, it will rarely return, and that's in the Cost of Social Norms, page 85. And then he goes on, of course, to have a great paragraph and section about the fact that we live in both the social world and the market world has many implications for our personal lives. And so I think one of the big call to actions in this book, at least for me, I mean, maybe more or less highlighting the call to actions in my life, but you know, if you've been raised in a religious household, faith based or spiritual based household like I was, um, you abhor certain things that are bad for nature, that corporations do, where they don't have any corporate governance, and they're just not good actors in the public space. And so, you know, and this book does kind of paint a grim picture of the future of this is going to happen, tragedy of the commons, and that sort of thing. And so I think the big call to action is just to, and I'll get to it at the end because I just wrote my blog about it. Not the Upton Sinclair quote, but the Adam Smith, towards the end, the context of our character. Adam Smith reminds us that honesty really is the best policy, especially in business. And so, just having finished this book and then just having started a podcast for from Healthy Gamer, with Thor the coder, yeah, and they're putting out this great content. Um, but Thor basically, in response to like, how are you so successful, said, well, I just looked at what the market said, and the market was tired of getting burned by these game startups because the gaming industry, right? And then they said something that made me realize Dark Souls really did save the gaming industry, and I've talked about that before. Anyway, that's an aside. But what is interesting is that the more transparent, the more honest, the more upfront, and then just like ethical that you are, the more you try to just be a good, decent human being, no matter how many times someone takes advantage of you or screws you over or whatever, right? You have to just like take these as learning experiences and use it to best judge or to provide you with a reinforcement in the future for an action that you might take. If you may not have learned it the way that you learned it, you may not have been able to utilize it when it was really important. And so sometimes it's good to have the small boo boos before the big injury comes, because once the big injury comes, how do you recover? Speaking of injuries, safe driving. I clicked the whole thing with a bookmark, but it does talk about teenagers and driving alone. This one is more like I hope my son just stumbles upon this book and goes to that tab, more or less. Thoreau wrote, "Simplify, simplify, and indeed simplification is one mark of real genius." And so that's one of the things that I think Alex Hormozy really illustrates well in his is that, he you spend so much time simplifying, and that's where the gold is at. And so many people don't because we're all cognitively biased to think that we're smarter than everyone else, that we know more, and that people know intuitively what we're talking about when that's really not the case. And so, what I used to think was a big weakness for me was like not being able to like respond with disses in real time and like not having a comeback for 3 days or something like this. When I realize the older I get, that's actually a strength. And the reason is because you slow down and you think about things, and that's okay. You're simplifying it. You're taking the time to simplify it in your head and find out if it has any meaning. And so, basically, by simplifying the things and trying to make it as translatable as possible, not like anything I do because it's just off the cuff. There's no pre prep to these. These are diving right in type type movies and reviews, and merely staying there for the whole experiment. Okay. This was the experiment of the blue door, green door, and red door, and people's penchant to change directions. And I think this is great reminder for investing because you might be already in a portfolio or in a stock position or three that are like actually like going to return the highest, and like you don't have to jump around, like you're gonna continue to get dividends or whatever regardless of the market conditions. And so it's like all about that strategy, but human curiosity gets the better of you is basically what this experiment illustrated. You're able to click on different doors, and then they started placing time constraints versus the control group, and then diminishing returns as well were included, and the outcome was pretty interesting. So trying to overcome your natural curiosity killed the cat, then you could potentially be more successful by nailing down, niching down, essentially. I liked this one about the coffee experiment. When the coffee ambiance looked upscale, the coffee tasted upscale as well. And so this was a whole experiment where they gave out free coffee at it was either Harvard or MIT or somewhere. MIT. Okay, so it was in tandem with London Business School, Harvard Business School, and they opened up a impromptu coffee shop. And they experimented in a couple of different ways. One where the coffee was given away in styrofoam containers. The free accoutrements were also in styrofoam container type things. And then in another one, It was like really done, handwritten, like on really nice, with really nice utensils. And the survey form basically asked like, how did it taste? And it basically tasted better, even though it was the same coffee in both instances when the setting was nicer. And so this is just a reinforcement for me as far as why looks and sales are important, because people are judgmental, and this is just a fact of life. And so it just goes to show you that presentation is important, and we are cognitively biased for this outcome. And so intuitively, maybe being a contrarian, and I think being a contrarian investor has served me very well over the past decade, has led me to that same thought in real life of like, don't base everything off first impressions, because there are people who know this cognitive bias and will intentionally not perform their best upon first impression because they want the person who's actually going to grow with them and grow to know them. And so if you turn this off within yourself, this is an action that we can all do to maybe make life in the world a little bit better by removing some of these biases based on look alone. All right, so I've got a little pink tab over here on, are we doomed then to get lower benefits every time we do get a discount? But it's a little further up. The Sobe drinks. This is energy drink wise. Um, Basically placebo effect versus not placebo effect versus perceived price. So they basically took Sobe, which, rest in peace, that was a great drink. I miss it. I didn't get to drink quite enough of it in my time. So this experiment basically charge students different prices for the Sobe, and the energy levels, perceived or otherwise, though the same drink, were a little bit higher when the students paid more. So the expectation was if they paid more, then they're going to get more. And so this is just reinforcement for things that like Alex Hormozy builds upon, of like, if people pay you a lot of money, they expect a lot. And there's nothing wrong with being paid a lot of money if you're going to provide that value, that experience, if you're going to provide that professionalism that they may not get from someone else who isn't ready to step up to that level of the game. And you have to be able to step up to that level of the game if you're going to provide that level of service and ask that price. So just be prepared, and that looks different based on who you are and how you set up whatever it is you're doing, your lifestyle, brand, your company, whatever it is. Then there's the second type of dishonesty. This is the kind committed by people who generally, page 273, consider themselves honest. The men and women, please stand, who have borrowed a pen from a conference site, taken an extra splash of soda from the soft drink dispenser, exaggerated the cost of their television on their property loss report, or falsely reported a meal with Aunt Enid as a business expense. Well, she did inquire about how work was going. So I thought this was interesting because this studied the separation effect between the money. And the extreme example is when he talks about Enron, and it's like, do you really think that the guy who, one of the main guys responsible for Enron, do you think he would have actually gone up and mugged the old ladies, stealing their money out of their purse? Probably not. Though a lot of elderly people were affected by the Enron scandal through their pensions, and it just, right, through creative accounting. All right, and this book is another great example of like how we get creative with our reasoning, with our logic, with the things that we do and tell ourselves. And this is just like a call to action and a great reminder to say, hey, it's okay to not be as smart as you think you are. The important thing is to be honest with yourself. All right. We know that the second kind of dishonesty exists, but how prevalent is it? Furthermore, if we put a group of honest people into a scientifically controlled experiment and attempted to cheat, would they? So they did a bunch of studies on that as well. But I think the main takeaway is that just really be careful about your ethics, and how just because it's a token doesn't mean that it's not money, right? Just because you have a lithium battery just because we're here in capitalist America, just because you're so lucky. I'm looking at you, Scandinavian countries, to not have a care in the world, that literally all you're doing is trying to find the best way to live life, being so like separated from the suffering that you're causing through the capitalism. And like that's okay. You just have to accept your privilege. Like we're all privileged to be here in America at the suffering of other people. And coming to terms with that is hard for a lot of people. And I think that this like if this became more prevalent, we could potentially see a little bit more of a progressive world, both human wise, like for humanity and spiritually as well. Um, Back to Adam Smith reminded us that honesty really is the best policy in business. I'm hanging on to that one because it's just like what I do. I know that I've made mistakes in business, and it's very humbling to have to go to a homeowner and explain a situation, or even just like eat thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in essentially what's your mistake, you know, and that's all learning. It's just an expensive lesson, and it's all in like the stoicism, right? It's all about how you accept that. Anyway, the last sticky I made was the author and journalist Upton Sinclair once noted, "It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon his not understanding it." And that just hit me right in the feels, because so many people are fine with that, and that's okay. Some of us aren't, and we're considered weirdos, we're outcasts, or maybe we're just rational thinkers in an irrational world, in a predictably irrational world. So I highly encourage this read. It was very compelling. Again, like this thing peeled me away from the PlayStation and the PC games each night. Um, and again, Predictably Irrational was that because this was recommended to me by an esteemed client of mine who I perceive as very successful, and I think is very successful. I mean, the guy just traveled to Dubai and Saudi Arabia and India, Delhi, and just all of these places for his job. And I've looked up his company, and so was it a bias because you see successful people and you want to mirror what they do, or was it actually a really good read? So I will let you make your own decisions. If you've read it, drop a comment, please. I would like to hear what you thought about this book if you've read it, and please consider following.